View options.
View
I don't see that.
options.
I don't even see that, Sally. Oh, now I see somebody else, but not you.
My pleasure to call to order the meeting of the Board of Directors for the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for February the 18th, 2021. To begin with, we have some public hearings. And today's public hearing is convened under the provisions of the British Columbia Local Government Act to hear submissions relative to proposed bylaws 2728 and bylaw 2729. We have encouraged written submissions to this hearing, and because the public cannot attend in person at this time, the meeting is organized so that we may also accept live video submissions. This is the public's opportunity to make representations to the board. All persons present who believe that their interest in property is affected by the proposed bylaws shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaws. I would ask those members of the public who wish to speak to please commence your address to this board by clearly stating your name. The board will not debate the matters of a proposed bylaw with individual citizens, but board members may ask you questions following your presentation. The public hearing is to listen to your views, thus no one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views heard. Bylaw 2728 amends zoning bylaw 2400 on a site-specific basis for approximately 1.5 hectares of crown land in Jesmond to enable full-service guest ranch and resort use. The subdivision and consolidation of the land will secure all full-service guest ranch and resort buildings on one parcel. Madam Corporate Officer, are there any written submissions?
Mr. Chair, there are no written submissions.
Are there any video submissions?
Not for this one, no.
Okay. There being no further submissions, speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. Bylaw number 2729 amends zoning bylaw 2400 by rezoning a portion of 1420 Abbey Road in Cherry Creek from mobile home 1 MH1 manufactured home park to RVP1 recreational vehicle park 1. If passed, the rezoning would enable a 12-site RV park. It also amends RVP1 zone on a site-specific basis to allow RV storage, limited to a maximum of 30 RVs in the RVP zoned areas. Madam Corporate Officer, are there any written submissions?
There are no written submissions.
Are there any live video submissions?
There are, I believe we have Mr. Randy Hogg on Zoom, and he would like to address the board.
Would you please go ahead, Mr. Hogg?
You'll need to unmute yourself, Mr. Hogg.
Yeah, I'm unmuted there now. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Zoom meeting number 1 for me. Yeah, I wasn't really planning to address, just I'd be available for questions more than anything. My engineer is not available, but he is available by telephone. So, and I think there's a little bit of a discrepancy. The letter we received, I guess, for the notice of public hearing mentions it's all 15 site recreational vehicle park, and it also mentions 12. I talked to Regina about that earlier today. I guess it's there's one little strip of land. It would whether it's 12 or 15 would be dependent on the spacing between them and the access. He was applying, I think, for 15, but it could actually not, but it certainly wouldn't be more.
Is he, sorry?
That's
Director Swan, did you have a question for Mr. Hogg?
No, there's a Mr. Swan who'll be addressing the board later on another matter.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Hogg? Hearing none, thank you for appearing and thank you for making yourself available for questions. The board will consider this matter later in the meeting today.
Thank you.
Are there any further speakers or submissions with respect to bylaw 2729? Hearing none, I declare the public hearing closed. I think that takes us to chair's announcements. Maybe I got the order of out of order in terms of calling to order, but I did call the meeting to order, so I'm not going to do it again. And I would say welcome to our February 18th, 2021 meeting. And I'm pleased to see, I can't tell you how pleased I am to see that the weather has improved from last week. And it does look like there might be a spring this year. First, recruitments are underway for the first Indigenous Engagement Coordinator. And the coordinator will proactively engage, build a rapport, and maintain relationships with TNRD area Indigenous and First Nations communities to help inform library programs and services. And second, after months in the development, the library is pleased to offer all TNRD directors a sneak peek at its new website. An email outlining the login process will be in your email following today's meeting. The public launch is February 22nd, so clearly it's just right around the corner. With the transmission of COVID-19 in Kamloops and other communities increasing, and talk of new variants all over the country, I want to take this time to draw your attention to the importance of holding steady in your current efforts in maintaining a physical distance, wearing your layered mask, remembering that this deters the spread, it does not stop it, and practicing good hand hygiene. And by doing this, you're ensuring that we continue to flatten the COVID-19 curve. If we do this now, we could see restrictions ease and have a glimpse of a more relaxed spring and summer. I want to take this opportunity to extend condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of the employee who lost his life at the New Afton mine on February the 2nd. Thoughts are also with the two injured employees, their families, and first responders, rescue personnel, and all involved in this difficult time. With respect to upcoming meetings and events, on February the 19th, tomorrow, we have a committee of the whole meeting in the morning. March the 10th, an audit committee meeting and an invasive plant committee meeting. March the 11th, Electoral Area Directors Committee meeting and a regular board meeting. And on March 25th, a regular board meeting and hospital board meeting. In your blue folders today, you will find any mail personally addressed to you, parking passes for parking lots, if you've requested them, 2021 TNRD committee membership list, and notice of motion from Director Rothenberger. Are there any additions or deletions to or from the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there are. We are removing 11.1.7 on the agenda regarding the NDIT internship report. We're also adding under section 17, the call for closed. In addition to section 91A, we're also calling the meeting under section 91C, labor relations and employee relations, and 91I, the receipt of legal advice.
Okay, and those will be at the conclusion of our regular board meeting.
Correct.
And I will not be referring to those sections again.
Correct. We'll just move in second. The resolution is changed.
Thank you. We have the minutes of the regular board meeting of January 14th, 2021. I'll entertain a motion to. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. Bylaws from public hearing, zoning amendment bylaw 2728, that parcel of tract of crown land in adjacent to DL 4948, Lillooet District, Jesmond.
Move the recommendation, Director Watson.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Zoning amendment bylaw, oh, I'm sorry, that's recommendation number 1. Was that Director Watson? Do you wish to move recommendation number 2?
Yes, move recommendation number 2 as well.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Now that takes us to bylaw number 2729, Abbey Road, Cherry Creek. There's one recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Director Elliott, seconded by Director Singh. Is there any discussion? Oh, okay. Seconded by Director Christian. Is there any discussion? Director Ward. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question to staff. If we're going from manufactured home park to RVP1, is there any changes in the sewer water requirements?
They are identical and they can, both aspects of that land use can be serviced by the same system.
Thank you for that.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, we're not going from MR1 to C or whatever. We're just adding we're keeping the mobile home park. Am I right, Director? And we're
So
adding
the
recreational.
parcel is very,
Ms.
very
Sadokova?
large, and only a portion of it is being rezoned.
Yes.
And
Okay.
it's the same portion of land, the bylaws unchanged, whether they put 12, 13 or 14 or up to 15 RVs, it's unchanged. The requirements would be the same and the bylaws the same.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed?
Councilor Riley.
Okay. The one opposed, it's the motion is carried. So we have a delegation from Ashcroft Terminal, a presentation from Cleo Landucci, Chief Commercial and Corporate Affairs Officer.
Chairman Gillis and members of the TNRD Board of Directors, thank you so much for having us here today. I understand that we have 10 minutes to make an update presentation. We're grateful for the time. If I have that wrong, please let me know how much time we have. I will go ahead and try to share my screen and hopefully this works. If you could just bear with me for one moment. And hopefully this comes up for everybody. Is that working for everybody? I think that's a thumbs up.
Yes, yep.
Great. Well, what I'd like to do today, again, thank you for having us here today. I wanted to give you an update on the progress that we're making, the expansion plans at Ashcroft Terminal located within the village of Ashcroft. But I want to first start by thanking you for your support in 2017 when we submitted an application for funding support through the National Trade Corridor Fund funded by Transport Canada. Your letter was very helpful and we appreciate your ongoing support. We've been in touch with many of the directors over time and we look forward to more opportunities together. I will run through at a high level, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to interrupt. I wish we were doing this in person and we could have a discussion. We don't like presenting when we're not in person and we spent too much time on Zoom calls, but here we go. So I'll just give you a quick update as far as much of this you are obviously keenly aware since you're more familiar with the location than many people who see this overview presentation. Located in the village of Ashcroft. we are, I'm just going to fix my view here for 1 sec. Can you see my slide okay?
Yes.
All right. 1 moment. There we go. Is that better? Now you've got a full screen. So we are located, we are the largest inland port in Western Canada. We are the only location in the country with both CN and CP main lines that run directly through our facility. So we're adjacent to both main lines on either sides of our property. We have 320 acres of industrial zone land. So this is a really critical map. Obviously, many of you, all of you have driven this highway many times, but this, I really want to draw your attention to the rail map here. The highlighted area is the area of within the canyon on Highway 1. This is the CN and the CP main lines. Every single piece of cargo that goes in and out of Metro Vancouver into North America must pass through this important corridor. In 2000, the CN and the CP came together and created an agreement called co-production, which sees that every single piece of cargo, every train that goes out of the Lower Mainland goes up on the CP, and every single train that comes down into the Lower Mainland comes down on the CN. That co-production zone starts just south of us in Basque, same location as the last spike of the CN in 1915. But it's very, very critical as an efficient trade corridor for getting trade in and out of our country. We get asked all the time as far as what we're going to be able to do in Ashcroft and how much activity and throughput we're going to have coming in trucks and rail and what have you. And so this helps put it in perspective as the size of our location geographically in comparison to some other ports. Others you're familiar with, of course, would be Ridley Terminal in Prince Rupert on 135 acres, Delta Port in our Canada's largest container import and export facility as an example. This is an aerial of a portion of our site. Our site is so large, it's very difficult to get it all in one shot, but this is what we look like about 6 months ago, but we are under 2 years into a 3-year expansion with funding support from Transport Canada of a $28 million build. We were thrilled to have Minister Garneau up on site to announce that, which I'll come to in a minute. The blue line is the CP main line running directly through the property. The red line is the CN main line. As you can see by the infrastructure, the track infrastructure, the lead line, and all of the subsequent storage and marshalling tracks, transloading tracks are within the boundaries of Ashcroft Terminal on the left of your screen. That's our CP rail yard. You can see that big, beautiful white building there in the center of the building that just came online at the beginning of January. That's an export warehouse facility, 40,000 square feet. It gets dwarfed on the size of this property, as you can imagine. It looks so small there, but trust me, it's very large. We look forward to having you tour it when it's safe to do so. On the right-hand side of your screen is the CN main line in red. You can see some trucks, look like ants, but trucks working away, clearing ground and getting ready for our tie-in to duplicate the infrastructure you see on the CP down in the CN yard. And that will be tied in April of this year. So very exciting to be able to tie in and have our shippers be able to use either service from the CP or the CN. Just as a quick high level again, why is Ashcroft unique? We are the only location in the country with both CP and CN main lines. So every single train going in and out of Vancouver passes through us. We are a secured private site. The municipal road ends at Ashcroft Terminal. We operate 24/7, 365. We have scalable and flexible infrastructure development. As a private company, we're able to scale and build to our customers' specifications and requirements. We are a non-union labor force. We have in-house rail and container handling operations. And we have an arid climate, which is really an advantage for many of our shippers on the bulk side where rain is an issue. Today, we really focus on 4 key streams of business. We do transloading of product, so from truck to rail, rail to truck, rail to rail. We do fleet management and rail car storage, so like a rail car storage parking lot for a variety of different private shippers and users. We have just launched our container program. You can see some of those containers backed up on chassis into our warehouse there, which is very exciting. And we do warehousing and storage of various products. We've been growing significantly. Today we have 29 customers servicing all sectors of natural resource, from forestry, agriculture, oil and gas, mining, you name it, we would love to do it. So we have 29 customers along those lines. And of course, shifting now into the intermodal or container business of stuffing and destuffing marine containers for furtherance into the hinterland of Canada. Here are some recent shots of our operation. As you can see, we've got lots going on, lots of growth, lots of different activities. Again, I'm sensitive to time, so I'm trying to kind of go through these a little bit more quickly, but of course, always happy for offline discussions when your time allows. In August of 2018, this is a picture of our Minister Garneau along with other local, I think Director Rice, you'll recognize yourself in this photo. Thank you for coming that day and helping to celebrate the announcement of the funding support from the federal government of $9.2 million. And that's really because of the focus to drive opportunities for Canadian exporters and importers to have choice of service providers, which is unique to anywhere else in Canada, along with providing a resilient and flexible location to facilitate trade through increasing rail activity. This is a high level of what the build includes. And I think I've covered off most of this, but this is sort of the red is all of the infrastructure that is included in this build. The blue is what was existing prior. We've been building this business as a family for the last 20 years, but we recognize that in order to have a greater impact and be able to service the next level of customers, we needed a global understanding of supply chain. And we launched a process to look for the right partner to come in and tell us how to do this properly and to really build out this entire supply chain network in Western Canada. We are absolutely thrilled that 2.5 years ago, we walked up the aisle and said, I do, and sold 60% of the business to PSA International. PSA is the world's largest container port operator. They are headquartered in Singapore. And we are extremely lucky to have PSA make their first investment in North America in Ashcroft Terminal, recognizing the importance of an inland hub to facilitate trade. In 2020, to put it in perspective, PSA did 86 million containers through over 43 ports around the world with 38,000 different staff members globally. These are the locations of their marine ports. What's really interesting and what we love about the way PSA thinks is if you look at the China example, there's a series of inland container terminals that they really were at the forefront of understanding the future of container shipments, both from an export and an import side. And they've been working very closely with different terminals around the world that they've been investing in to create those inland hubs and take trucks off the road and find more efficient direct routes to marine ports. Since they made the acquisition and invested in Ashcroft Terminal, they subsequently have invested and purchased 100% of Halifax Terminal, which is serviced by the CN, and has since been renamed to PSA Halifax. Previously was called Halterm. And further, they made another investment down in Philadelphia in Penn Terminals. This is an animated build out. You probably saw this a couple years ago, but really want to highlight that the future of our business, again, this is not existing, just to clarify, this is where we're going. This is the kind of infrastructure we're putting in. Everything we're doing now are the phases to get to that to get to this full build out. And you can see that our focus is on both the import and the export facilities to facilitate that transloading of container import and export products. Really, there's a huge amount of benefits for the shippers that they're recognizing since we've attracted 29 as of today. The ability to have an opportunity to leverage their service with the rail loads. They can control their transload operation and have more direct say on how that works. connectivity and choice, access to the marine ports and into the rest of North America, integrated operations, and really allows for flexibility. Real key here for the future is the reduction in emissions and achieving the carbon footprint reduction that our governments are after around transferring the product and getting it off of truck and onto rail. We don't claim that we're going to solve the entire environmental issues in transportation, but we certainly would like to have an impact and continue to think we can do so. And really to be a freight village and aligning the interest of our shippers with each other and helping to be those voices together. Coming down a few feet to the local impact, over the years, as we've continued to grow, there has continued to be some trespassing through the terminal in our industrial site to access the slough. The slough is zone park, but it is also private property and part of Ashcroft Terminal. This has been obviously really sensitive for us and something over the last 20 years that we've been really trying to discourage. We appreciate that certain folks in the community have enjoyed using the slough as parkland, but in order to access it, make no mistake, you must trespass across the CN main line. And that is a significant safety issue that obviously CN and CP are not going to allow, and something we have to be very cautious of, because in order to access the trespass across the CN main line, you have to trespass through our industrial yard. So we've had to make some changes as we expand the CN yard and look at bringing that product down to grade and building out that rail yard. And so we have at the end of Evans Road, the municipal road, and the start of the Ashcroft Terminal property, where there was access previously that perhaps folks didn't realize was private. We have had to put up a gate to protect the community members. And so we've been working with the community and local municipalities and launched a working group to really communicate this and make sure that we hear people's concerns and feedback. Whether we can address each and every one of those is another matter, and something we are very sensitive about, and we fully respect and appreciate. But it has been an issue for many years. In fact, I just located several letters from the previous owner that in 1981 was submitting letters to local municipalities cautioning about trespassing and the safety issues around the main line. So this is just a local community matter that we're working with and trying to find other ways that we can support activity for recreational use within the village and other locations that aren't a health risk. This is the quick overview. I want to thank you again for your time. We're thrilled to be here and to update you. I'm sorry for the quickness, but appreciate you all have a lot on your agenda. I'm open to questions. I'm not sure if you allow that during these processes, but I'm open to them. And if you would prefer, I'm happy to take them at any time offline and look forward to that chance to spend more time together.
Thank you ever so much for your presentation, Cleo. It's good to see this terminal moving forward the way it is. We've been paying keen attention to it, and as I say, it's very good to see how much progress you've been able to make so far. There are some questions for you. The first one I see is from Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Landucci. I noticed in the one slide where it was built out what appeared to be a number of vertical tanks. Is there going to be hazardous material stored in those? And if so, has the port planned on putting in appropriate controls for that kind of thing?
Absolutely, I can address that, and thank you so much for your question. Yes, we do ship hazardous goods today. I can tell you the regulations for hazardous goods are, as far as Canada is concerned, are some of the highest in the world. We don't just adhere to federal and provincial and local regulations, we always go above that. And that was really a driving force in bringing in the largest port operator in the world with PSA to help us bring up our standards to achieve greater excellence. So there is a fixed fuel facility that is being constructed as we speak. That is going in now. There will be tanks of various fuel products. I would also like to highlight that we are 1.7 kilometers from the the closest residents. So as far as where these kinds of activities take place, which is across the country and thousands of locations, this is a really preferred location for many shippers because of its proximity to major cities and locations. And so we're really buffered by the 350 acres of agricultural land, which is the hillside we also own, which helps to deal with some of that encroachment. But I can assure you that the safety standards and the regulations and the environmental considerations are at the highest level and far exceed the requirements, but certainly happy to have any further discussions offline to get specific at your convenience.
Thank you for that answer, and I support your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. The piece of property that's being used by the public that goes way back, obviously it's for access to the river. And so you're saying that you're encouraging them to go somewhere else, but what steps is your company doing at looking at other locations within that area to be able to enhance the same experience that those people have been experiencing over the last 40 or 50 or maybe 100 years? What other things have you doing other than just encouraging them to go somewhere else?
This has been a very sensitive issue and one that we've been really understanding about, and we fully get since we've been in the location for a long time and we've witnessed it. The challenge is that we have it anywhere that you access the river at Ashcroft Terminal requires you to trespass across the CN main line across the busiest rail corridor in the country. And that is the number one issue. And so that is not something that the CN or the CP will allow. It is a great concern. There was a fatality south of Ashcroft, not on our property, south of Ashcroft in the last 24 months, where an individual did unfortunately pass away by trespassing across the CP main line. We are unfortunately reminded of these terrible accidents on a regular basis. We also had a trespasser in the slough several years ago who passed away by unfortunately having an accident. He was trespassing and squatting on the property and blew himself up in a tent with a propane stove. These are the kinds of things that as a business and as we're growing that we just simply must protect the community. And I appreciate that not everybody wants to hear that, but it's not accessing the slough in this specific location is not something we can look to accommodate, and it's not something that the railroads can do. Working with the village to find other locations where we might be able to support investment in other locations to access is something that we are very open to exploring, and we're in the midst of doing that.
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from safety, and that's not what I was asking. I was looking at more at the end of your conversation about if there's any other opportunities within that geographical location to be able to have the same type of an experience, whatever people are doing, whether they're swimming or fishing or whatever. So that's good news. If you're looking at those types of investments, that's great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, we're looking at alternatives, whether it's river or where we can do it. We're not going away. We're going to be in the community a long time. We've grown our job force from 18 to 65 full-time staff members over the last 24 months. Their families' enjoyment, and as we continue to grow, which will be significant, we look to recruit other families into the area which are relocating. It's important that recreational opportunities exist to enjoy this great location, this great municipality and the surrounding areas. So we will look, and I can't disclose any more than that, except that we're in the midst of assessing certain options right now.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Ms. Landucci? Director Watson.
Yes, thank you for letting me ask a couple of questions. One is, as a child, I remember going to White Rock and having to cross over several tracks to get to the water. I wonder what they've done, or if they just stopped people from accessing the ocean because the railroad is more safe, more important than people. And I'd also like to know if you, as you proudly announced that you were non-union, are the employees actually getting paid good enough to make them stay around? Because if you try really hard to stay out of non-union, people will go to where they get paid well.
Well, thank you very much, Director Watson, for your questions. Great questions, of course. With regards to White Rock, I would really leave it for you to talk to CP to discuss some of the measures they've taken. But I do know that they've had the unfortunate history over the last few years of dealing with several fatalities of people trespassing in an unsafe manner. And it's been a real tragedy. That's something that all of us in every community, no matter if you're in industry or you're the neighbor, that it should be our priority. I can also say there's many differences between that corridor and our corridor. This is the busiest corridor, and that's very different from the White Rock route as how the rail network works. So I won't be able to speak on behalf of CP and all the measures they've taken in White Rock, but it is a very different, it's not an apples for apples comparison. With regards to your question on labor force, we are so happy about and thrilled about the team that we've been focused on attracting. We have some terrific positions that we have been able to fill. We always in our entire 20-year experience of running this as a family business and now with PSA, the reason that they asked us to stay on as partners is to really help with that local knowledge. We always focus on employing local first, always. And, we certainly have certain skilled laborers, IT personnel, some management that have relocated their entire families and now have bought homes in Ashcroft and are staying in Ashcroft. Finding remuneration and talking about the details of how we do that, I can give you at a high level to tell you that I'm personally thrilled that we were able to hire an HR manager and a team to come on and take over a lot of this good work to make sure that we are extremely competitive in the marketplace. We are not going away. We are going to be here for the long term. We are growing a very important business. And as anyone in business knows, you do not have anything if you don't have good people. And so I can assure you that that is our top priority, is to make sure that our people are happy and are in a place where they are able to earn a living that is very competitive in the marketplace. And we're thrilled to be able to do that. We've had terrific job retention especially over the last 3 years, as that's been the important metric of what we've grown, terrific job retention, and continue to work closely with our community and our HR team to ensure that we're a best in class employer. And will we make mistakes? Of course we will, it's business, but we look to improve and continue to do better at every turn. So I hope that addresses your concern and your question, but I appreciate the question, Director Watson.
Thank you.
Ms. Landucci, there's some kind of an event occurring here at the Sandman Center, so we're going to deal with that. And thank you for your fulsome answers to the questions, and thank you ever so much for your presentation. But we're going to take a break here for a few minutes till we find out what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
So what's going on at the Sandman Center? Ooh.
He honestly thinks it's warmer inside than outside, but I disagree.
We're not sure.
My signal's not so good this morning, so I'm gonna probably turn off my video in case anybody cares.
next delegation is the Kamloops Food Policy Council. And we are looking forward to a presentation, but I'm not sure who all is going to make the presentation, whether it's going to be Mr. Folkard or Ms. Harris or Catherine Tarasoff or all three, but.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Lindsay Harris, and I'll be co-presenting today with Percy Folkard. Catherine Tarasoff was unfortunately unable to join us today, but we do hope to revisit you again a few months down the road with her with us. So please just give me a moment, and I'll share the screen presentation that we have for you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, is someone able to confirm for me that you can see that presentation all right?
Looks good, Lindsay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So like I said, my name is Lindsay Harris. I'm the Food Policy Implementation Lead with Kamloops Food Policy Council. So in that portfolio, I'm delighted to have the responsibility for moving forward a number of different agriculture sector development projects that we have on the go right now. And I'll let my co-presenter Percy introduce himself as well to you.
Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Percy Folkard. I'm a farmer and a rancher east of Kamloops in Monty Lake. I'm the current board chair of the Kamloops Food Policy Council, and I'm also an ecologist and teacher in the Applied Sustainable Ranching program at TRU. And I'm involved in a few projects that are advocating for regenerative soil and food systems, including this one today.
Thanks, Percy. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Kamloops Food Policy Council as an organization, we are a nonprofit with a vision to see a local food system that is regenerative, sovereign, and just, which is a really expansive vision that has us working in a number of different domains, including community food security and poverty reduction, economic development, and economic vitality for our local food producers. And we also look at environmental sustainability and a number of different areas. We work to achieve that vision through three different methods. The first being policy, advocacy, and engagement at all levels of government. We also operate a number of different programs, and we'll be sharing a couple of those programs with you today. And then finally, but most importantly, the KFPC is known for its ability to cultivate strong community partnerships. And we know that food is something that really brings people together. And we've really leveraged that to build a very broad network that pulls a number of different organizations and community members together to build that local food system that is really regenerative, sovereign, and just, and meets the needs of our community members in the region. One of our most recent and very successful projects has been a collective impact food policy implementation project. This project received funding from the Real Estate Foundation and the Vancouver Foundation in 2019, and that enabled the KFPC to initiate a collective action process that included representatives from local government, from the City of Kamloops and the TNRD, from our Indigenous communities, and a number of different nonprofit organizations, including our regional economic development organizations, and a number of different community members. That collective action process really sought to identify shared aspirations in existing plans and policies at different levels of government, such as the City of Kamloops Food and Urban Agriculture Plan and Agriculture Area Plan. And we really leveraged those shared aspirations to spark collaboration and to say that, you know, as an organization, we really didn't want to see these policies and plans sitting on the shelf. We wanted to see them being implemented and actualized. And we took the opportunity to really drive some grassroots collaboration and promotion of the aspirations that those plans were trying to achieve. So today, Percy and I are going to share with you just two of the outcomes of that project. The first being a focus on food processing and innovation. So one of the working groups that our collective impact process facilitated has been a working group focused on building infrastructure for supporting food processing businesses. That working group has representation from 20 different organizations and groups. And in 2019, we were the recipient of some funding from the BC Ministry of Agriculture to support a feasibility study. And that feasibility research that we conducted strongly suggested the need for a food processing hub for our region. The model that we're envisioning for the hub will be to offer shared commercial kitchen space for rent to food entrepreneurs, and then pairing that available infrastructure with business accelerator programs to support enterprise development. So like many nonprofit organizations, we have experienced some delays in implementing the project due to COVID-19, but we are at the point where we are sourcing startup funding for full implementation of this project, and we do expect to launch it this year. One of the reasons why we're so confident that this project is going to be successful is that alongside the feasibility research that we did, we also ran a pilot. And we were able to accept 5 different emerging food processing businesses. And we partnered with Kamloops Innovation and lifted the successful incubator model that they use for technology businesses, adapted it to the food processing industry. And all of the businesses that participated in the pilot experienced significant increase in business viability over the short term of the pilot, and really boosted the visibility of some really exciting made in Kamloops products. So you know, with the experience that we have with this pilot, we're really so encouraged that number one, there's a real need to spark this innovation and support for food processing entrepreneurs, and number two, that there's also an interest on the part of those entrepreneurs in receiving the services that we will plan to have available through a food hub project. We're equally excited about some of the things that we've been hearing from farmers and ranchers across the region about how this food hub project will also boost their ability to diversify their revenue streams, to move into different value-added products that will help their farms and ranches to become more economically viable, and for them to increase production and really create what we envision as a very positive feedback loop where the food processing and the food production on our local farms and ranches can really support each other to really create agriculture as an economic driver across the TNRD. So I'll turn it over to Percy to share a little bit about the next program that we want to talk to you about today.
Thanks, Lindsay. So, you know, over the last probably 150 years in agriculture, we've witnessed a number of trends as you know, the Green Revolution focused on production and feeding the world. And then in the last 20 to 10 years, we've a lot of agricultural groups and farmers around the world have focused back on the soil. What can the soil do for us? And we're realizing it's a huge black box of unknowns, and we don't have the research and extension and supporting programs. Most of those have been shut down over the last number of years, and we really have a lack of capacity for learning these things. And so, you know, we think about carbon in the atmosphere, we think about carbon in the above ground trees, but we often forget about the value that putting carbon back in the soil can do for nutrient cycling, energy cycling, water holding capacity. And there's a real opportunity to relook at agriculture now through the holistic soil health lens to bring quality back into agriculture and to return on investment so that we can start to have projects be carried out where we're fully understanding what's happening with the soil and benefiting from it. If you go to the next slide, Lindsay. So an initiative we're putting together is to establish a soil health institute that would address a lot of these gaps that we're not seeing in agriculture anymore. So our concept is to have an applied and academic research focus so we can provide extension and other activities with solid science-based approach to how we're feeding the soil, how we're doing soil land management and the environmental impacts of our farming operations, or benefits, or both. We also need to have a soil testing, mapping, and inventory approach so we can understand what benefits we are seeing from doing particular practices with our soils, and are we in fact putting carbon back below ground. And then finally, we need to have that demonstration and extension capacity so that participants and partners of the program can be helped and guided and achieve success in anything that they're tackling in a new trial or in a research and development trial of a regenerative process, so that we can ensure that they succeed in the end. So the big whys for this, I've talked about the soil regeneration piece and the need to start putting water back and carbon back in the soil, and start to think about how that was very similar to our indigenous food systems and our holistic principles, where we had food systems that were incorporated into watersheds, and cultivation was not so much with a tractor and a plow, but it came through burning and wildfire. And so we have a lot of holistic interests that we want to incorporate back into our agricultural program in a economically viable perspective. And so this is why we've got our soil health initiative up and running, to start to get that interest and the formalization of the information we need to adapt agriculture for the future. And maybe I'll turn it back over to Lindsay now.
Yes, definitely. Thanks so much, Percy. So this soil health project is in its incubation stage, but again, because it comes out of that robust collective impact process that we facilitated, there are so many partners across the community and the region that are really excited about working together to make this come to fruition. So we're very excited about some of the outcomes that we expect to see in terms of ecosystem health, improved economic viability. We know that regeneratively managed farms and ranches do succeed in terms of their economics. And we're also hoping to connect the project to improve disaster resilience. So that's both wildfire resilience and flooding. And there is some interesting research that's underway that is supporting those outcomes. So we, just very briefly to conclude, we do have a specific ask for how we could imagine the board supporting this work that we're doing, investing in agriculture in the region. One of the reasons why our collective impact process was so successful, and one of the reasons why we were able to leverage the success of that process in grant applications and securing further funding to support the work, is because we were able to draw on shared aspirations through defined policies and plans. And so we are really interested in having the board consider the possibility of developing an agriculture area plan for the TNRD. There is funding, different funding opportunities that are available specifically to support agriculture planning. And those plans, once they're in place, can really be leveraged by community organizations like us to increase investment in the region. And so there's the benefits of leveraging the plan itself, but also the process of developing the plan, really generating like a strong community dialogue about what we really want to see agriculture look like in the TNRD in the years to come. There are so many benefits that come from both the process and from having a plan in place that an organization like KFBC can use to leverage and support the work that we're doing. And then in addition to really encouraging you to consider thinking about developing an agriculture area plan, we would also appreciate having a connection with a staff liaison at the TNRD, with a preference for someone who has specifically economic development in their portfolio. We would love to be able to make sure that our work is coordinated and aligned with the vision that you have as a board for the economic viability of the TNRD in the years to come. So, so those are the requests that we have for you to consider. We're also more than happy to answer any questions that you have for us.
Well, thank you ever so much for your presentation, and it's encouraging to see the fact that that there's some keen interest being displayed in soil. It's been a concern to many of us for many years, is the depletion of our soils. So that's good to see. I think with respect to your ask, I think that that our CAO, Mr. Hildebrand, has some views to share with you there.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. I would just respectfully ask if we could defer the to staff so that we can just fully understand the ask and make sure that we can provide the resources and work closely with the presenters to just get a better understanding and then bring that that learning back to the board.
Yes, absolutely. Please take as much time as you need.
And are there questions for Ms. Lindsay or?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I have actually two questions. One is, are you planning an outreach to some of the smaller communities that have community gardens? That's my first question. And the second one, you were talking about community kitchens. Is that just specific to Kamloops? And is that not kind of providing some kind of unfair competition to restaurateurs who are having a hard time right now? Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so there's some great questions there. In terms of outreach to communities across the region, our feasibility research process that we engaged in for the Food Hub did have us reaching out specifically to farmers and ranchers all across the region. So that is definitely a step that we have taken, although we haven't done it specifically with community gardens, but that's certainly something that that we can continue to do. Of course, our capacity just in the feasibility research process was somewhat limited, but as we take steps towards full implementation of the Food Hub, we would definitely you know, we are a collaborative organization. Our success is based on the partnerships that we develop and cultivate. So we are 100% interested in reaching out. And if you have any of your constituents who would fall into those categories, please absolutely direct them to us, and we would be happy to communicate. The second part of your question was pertaining to competition with restaurants. And so I think that that is, I mean, it's a complex question, and economic development, when it happens in the sort of proactive way, does generate those kind of questions. You'd see the same sort of thing with tech innovation hubs, which are sector specific and are targeted towards boosting a specific sector, and the reason, there are lots of reasons in favor of a kind of targeted sector specific approach like that. One being that there are very strategic reasons why we would see that that having locally available processed foods is it's a community good that really boosts the overall community resiliency and food security for our community. I know, if we sort of think back to almost a year ago now, when the initial closures from COVID-19 came in place, and we had some disruptions in the local food supply chain, and a lot of people sort of experienced the reality of, oh wow, this is what it looks like if this grocery store shelf is empty, and we do really need to be thinking about how we build that resiliency in our communities, and so targeted investments in particular sectors is one way of doing that. Of course, the community kitchen spaces that we'll be offering, the businesses will be paying for that space, and they'll be paying a competitive market rate for it. So it's and even the business acceleration services, the businesses who participated in the pilot paid into that program and then received the mentorship in exchange. So it's not coming to businesses as a free gift, but it is a targeted sector specific approach that really is strategically trying to address an area that we need to develop for community resiliency. I think too that there are actually lots of opportunities for restaurants and catering businesses, food trucks, to really take advantage of the services that are going to be available by the Food Hub. We did include local restaurants in the research that we did. So we spoke to many local restaurant owners, and especially with the way that you've seen restaurant businesses pivot during the pandemic, many of them to offering specific, packaged goods for takeout. The ability for a restaurant owner to have the services of a food hub like this and a real, to create real synergies, I think, in growing the market for local food and local packaged food. I can imagine restaurants, and we saw that too in our research, although unfortunately our research was carried out prior to the pandemic. I think that some things will have changed for restaurants, and we actually expect that restaurants would be more likely now to benefit from the services of a food hub. So I hope that answers your question in part. Please feel free to ask a follow-up if I haven't been fully clear.
Oh, thank you.
Director Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, years ago at this table, we saw an amazing presentation from, I think it was Ministry of Agriculture or somebody who was an agrologist about the 100-mile, all the different places around the region that actually have food processing and horstings and Cache Creek and those kind of things over there. But there's like, I was struck by how many there are. So do we have, maybe the Food Policy Council folks know about that too, but it would be nice to sort of see that again in terms of this conversation.
Yes, definitely. I think that you might be referring to a presentation by Graham Strachan, who's a retired agrologist. And Graham also made the same presentation to our collective impact process, and he was a participant in that process. So I appreciate you raising that, and yes, those many opportunities that he shared are absolutely on our radar. Really, what our feasibility research found was that there's a real opportunity here to grow the market for local food processing, and so so it's not that there's no availability of commercial kitchen space at all in the region right now. It's that there's more demand, and there's really more opportunities for food entrepreneurs if we can create additional shared infrastructure. One of the other findings of our research was that some of the ways that those commercial kitchens are currently available to food entrepreneurs doesn't include some of the features that they need to make it truly viable to really grow and scale their business. So for example, a business currently might be able to rent commercial kitchen space, but it doesn't come along with, for example, dry storage or freezer storage, both of which are really essential for processed goods, especially when that business is ready to scale. And so we're trying to sort of fill a gap currently with making commercial kitchen space available that also has the storage available, that has the business acceleration services combined with it. So the sort of full package that our food hub will offer isn't currently available in the region, and even the spaces that are currently available aren't adequate to meet the demand that we discovered when we surveyed the entrepreneurs in the region.
Well, thank you again for your presentation. And are there any further questions for Ms. Harris?
Mr. Chair, I believe Director Rice had a question that he posted up on Zoom. I don't know if he wants to speak to it quickly.
Thank you.
No, it wasn't so much a question. I just want to say I did work with the food security group a little bit in Kamloops, went to a few of their meetings, and a bunch of incredible minds and passionate people. And of course, I represent that little farmer there on the outskirts and stuff. And we talked a little about merging the rural and the urban together. And hopefully we'll have more conversations about that going forward.
Thank you. And thank you again.
My signal is really bad.
A question for Director Singh. If there was a presentation, as you said, Director Singh? At this table, you heard that presentation? Was it
Yes,
restricted to frozen food by any chance?
No, it's McDonald's and Wendy's, Mr. Chair.
Thanks again, Ms. Harris. That takes us to building infraction. Robert Swan and Carolyn Swan.
Mr. Chair, Robert Swan is available on Zoom to address the board on this matter.
Thank you. Mr. Swan?
Mr. Swan, you have to take yourself off mute.
How's that?
Good.
That's
Can you hear me
better.
now? Okay, sorry. I'm not very good at this. I'm not Bill Gates, no. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to speak here and explain my situation. I've owned the property for about 30 years. We bought it. I'm co-owners with my wife's sister and her husband. And originally, I brought my trailer on here when we decided to move up. I got the building permit. I put one trailer in. I talked to the building inspector at the time, and he said, I told him what I wanted to do, which was bring two mobiles in and join them together with a modular unit in between, fire rated walls. That's what we needed, according to him, to make a duplex. The original application was for a 5-toilet septic, which I got, and a lot of things, as the current inspector pointed out, that was my plan. At any rate, what happened was I got my building in, their building came up, and they just moved it on there. The inspector told me that he would like to do one building at a time. So we didn't do that. We kind of ran out of money. I went down there and talked to him. He said, well, when you get the money to finish it off, come down and get a building permit. We didn't get any money together. I had to retire due to health reasons. For whatever reason, I am in infraction now. That's an infraction. So we went down, had a meeting with all the people involved down there, and we were told that we could not subdivide, which we had a surveyor put a, had it surveyed out for to split it in two, but we can't do that. And the building inspector said that we could no longer do the duplex thing, which the previous original guy had said that we could. So not much I can really do. This is what I'd like to do. They don't want, my brother and sister-in-law do not want to be a partner in this anymore because of the obvious problems with the building codes and why we can't have two mobiles separately or together for whatever reason on 25 acres. That's just your zoning situation. I would like to pull out another building permit for their mobile is actually newer than this one. So I'd like to get that one in there and get the proper inspections taken care of. There's also an addition on there that they built. I'll get that inspected. This is what I'd like to do is pull out another building permit and get that building legal. And then my father-in-law, who needs help, and we have a doctor's certificate to the state. So I would like to move into this one. I'll get this one put in properly too, legalized, whatever inspected I need to do. And because if you put the notice on here right now, I'm going to have to take a small mortgage out to buy my brother and sister-in-law out because I don't want to move and they don't want to deal with any of this anymore. So that's why I would like you to hold off on the notice and I'll go down and get the building permit and all that. I just haven't gone down there at this point because of the COVID and all that stuff. And I've been kind of staying at home and not going anywhere. But if I have to, I will go down there next week even and find out what I need from Pat, the current inspector, and I'll get started on that building permit. Now, do you have any questions for me?
Does anyone have questions for Mr. Swan? We'll be dealing with the matter later on in the agenda. Mr. Swan, thank you for providing your comments.
Did that make any sense at all? What I said?
I think it made sense. I don't think there was any question as to whether or not it made sense, Mr. Swan. I think that
Okay.
it's probably going to raise a number of issues that will be discussed when we deal with the matter further into the agenda. And Director Schaefer.
I would like to ask Mr. Swan how long he expects this to take before it's
Well,
within the rules.
I would say not more than a year. I mean, I just have to do a few things. I need an inspection on the units. And I mean, they're all properly built and all that stuff. So there shouldn't be a problem with that. I could go right down. I don't know how long it takes to get a building permit now, but you know, that's usually a few months and this and that. I wouldn't say outside of 6 months to a year.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Mr. Swan? There are none. Thanks very much, Mr. Swan, for your presentation.
Thanks so much.
This takes us to item 7.4, building infraction, Daryl Higgins and Laura Higgins. No final inspection.
There's no representations being made by those owners.
Thank you. Then we'll go to 7.5, electoral area M, Old Nicola Trail. Ms. Campbell?
No representations from the owners.
Thank you. That brings us to unfinished business. Building infraction, the matter addressed by Mr. Swan on 10260 Finley Road. We have a report from the Director of Development Services, Ms. Zilka, but did you have comments to make on this?
Yes, I can provide some information. I am familiar with the file and the property. And it is something that if Mr. Swan is willing, that can be resolved. However, as he said, there was no building permit for the second manufactured home, and the first manufactured home was never called for final inspections. That can be attended to, and the second manufactured home can be permitted under an additional dwelling for care. To combine two manufactured homes into a lawful duplex is something that we've been trying to research. Just, I know that that's no longer what he wants to do, but we've been contacting the certifying agency to find out if it's even possible. So that's as a separate issue. So I'm glad he's not planning that. We typically don't defer Section 57s for a year for a variety of reasons. There's his additional fee to take it off the title would be $200, but I understand his issue with the mortgage. I would suggest 6 months, that the board could add 6 or 7 months from today's date, and that the notice be put on title at that point if he has not resolved the infraction for both manufactured homes by then.
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would we be able to Mr. Savilkova, so would we be able to, in that 6-month period of time, either make an additional, if there was an additional request to extend it, we could, or we could decide at that time whether we wanted to go ahead with Section 57?
In the past, you could do it that way, but in the past, our preferences for there's quite a bit of effort with these because we have to follow a complicated process under legislation. I would suggest putting in the date because I find that helps push people along. And that gives him enough time to deal with his bank. So again, in one of the other ones on your list, the James Rose, Catherine Castro, you will notice on that one, the recommendation is to give them till May 25th. So that's another Section 57's, the item not 7.5. Item 8.3. So that one has a date of, oh dear. Why don't I see it? Oh, there it is. Yes. So I would suggest to give him 6 or 7 months to get his financing in place, and we will help him through the process to get the building permits without needing a rezoning and sort out the manufactured homes. If he is not happy, he can ask to be a delegation before the board.
Would that take us to the end of September? Where would, Director Stamer, just a minute, there's, moved and seconded, Director Quinn.
Just a question on the way we're doing this. Should we not perhaps defer a decision until that date? And then if he hasn't dealt with it, it just carries on? Is that an appropriate way to deal with it?
Mr. Dilkova?
No, it's, you, by that point, again, if you pass the resolution and he has a date, he knows what he's working toward. And then we don't have to go through the process again, because I don't think that deferring it, I would sooner at that point, if the board defers the whole process to that, we'd redo the whole process because it's.
Thank you. I withdraw a question.
Thank you. Director Stamer, that your suggestion was 6 months, as I understand it. I think that takes us to August 20th or whatever. Do you want to make a?
Yeah, that's fine. We could do August 31st or whatever is fine. I think that's more than enough time, even with COVID, for him to be able to work with staff and be able to
Thank you.
solve the issues.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Director Schaefer.
I would like to know after the 6 months, if he is working towards it, are we still going to put 57 against it, or are we going to extend what he can do if he's working towards it?
So if he's not done anything, I would say we would just put the notice on title. Often we have found people are motivated when, after years of asking or sending letters, that's usually a push. We'll often close these files once we send the Section 57 letter.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Takes us to, I think, item 8.2, building infraction to Lou Road. There is a recommendation.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? One opposed? I'm sorry, I can't. Was that Director Swan?
Director Swan.
Thank you. Okay, that's carried.
No, I was not opposed.
Sorry?
I was not opposed.
Oh, I'm sorry, Director Swan. I saw your hand up and I thought you were voting to oppose. That takes us to 8.3, building infraction, and there is a recommendation. That's the one dealing with May 25th. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Takes us to bylaws, building regulation amendment 2734. We have a report again from the Director of Development Services. And did you wish to speak to it, Ms. Zilkova, or we just move to the recommendations?
So just the summary speaks to it. First off, if there's any issues with any of this bylaw, I would just ask that you pass the portion that for the new application forms, because it's, everybody loves them. They're simpler and they're less than half the length.
Yeah, it's pretty much a housekeeping matter anyway, is it not? Yeah. Thank you. So we have 3 recommendations.
Move recommendation 1.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Is there any discussion? Director Ward, or Director Stamer. That's what he said.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I know we got lots to do here today. Just to staff, to Mrs. Savokova, when they're talking about the requirement to permit and inspect solid fuel appliances, can you just quickly give us a reason why we would not have that in the process anymore?
So first, it's very hard to recruit a fully qualified building inspector. We only have one building inspector who is wet certified. We used to have them all. So first off, we don't have the capacity to even do it. Second, what people want from us is for us to fill out their insurance papers, because the insurance companies want a wet certified. Typically, the installers in the industry, they do that, they carry that insurance, and they're the ones that people will need anyway. Not to say that they've ever installed them perfectly. Our inspectors have caught things that they've missed, but there's no point in charging the fee and going out there because we can't certify it. Traditional fireplaces, you know, with the masonry and the old fashioned kind, those are in the building code, and those we still do.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Takes us to development applications. It is 3 p.m. Ordinarily, we would consider a break at 3 p.m. I'm sorry? So you're in favor of a break? Okay, okay. I think we'll take 10 minutes now and reconvene at 3:10. Convened. And that takes us to item number 10, development variance permit application DVP 96 for the Loon Lake Road. There is a board report. Director Sadilkova.
Yeah, there's two recommendations. The staff recommendation is simply to deny at this stage before issuing the notice, which is the mail out to the neighborhood. But it is at the board's pleasure whether we continue with the mail out and then decide whether the board can decide whether to issue or not. The rationale for the denial is in the report.
Thank you. Does someone wish to move the recommendation or one of them?
I'd like to move that recommendation that we do the mail out before we shut it down completely.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Polderman.
I just find this, a little over the top that somebody goes and buys toys and then we need to grant a variance on the rules due to the fact that he bought too many toys. My thing is if he buys a float plane, are we going to give him a hanger too?
Actually, we don't have any control over hangars.
Director Singh.
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering I guess it's a hard question to ask, but I mean, from a staff perspective, this obviously goes against planning principles. Is there a likelihood that by notice of intent and getting the community to weigh in, there would be potential concern from the neighborhood as well on this? I mean, I just wanted to kind of, because I think sometimes we do things because they're actually not in line with just proper planning, and neighborhood may not have any concerns, but eventually it is a problem. So I just want to kind of understand from staff whether they think there's a, obviously the resolution here is to the recommendation is to deny. I don't usually see recommendations that give us a choice in that sense, but this is what they've done. Just want to ask them that question.
So
Ms. Sadilkova.
I can answer that. I'll be as brief as possible. On page 5 of this report, you see the last 5 variance recommendations for accessory buildings in this zone. And this one would be to go from, let me put it in square feet, 840 square feet, which is the size of a small bungalow, to 3,024 square feet. The last one that was, and it would be much bigger than the other ones, we rarely get input back when we issue the notice because people sometimes don't understand the dimensions. But once the accessory building is built in real space, that's unfortunately when we hear from the neighbors.
If I may ask the question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Director Singh.
So just on the size of that building, could that building, I mean, could another use for it be almost a party, dance hall kind of, I mean, they always use it for other things, but could they, for example, I once saw a Stanley Cup in a building in Shuswap Lake, which is a garage. There was a party going on there because one of the players has a place there. So is that a possibility that could also be a problem for the neighborhood they may not actually initially know about?
So in this case, it's always a possibility potentially with the future owner, but in this case, I do believe the applicant probably does have Mr. Robert Boza probably has a lot of toys to store. However, it is very close to the property line. It's a small lot in an established subdivision, and it will be off the charts in terms of the size in that property. So no, I think the applicant is sincere in terms of the use.
Ms. Sadilkova, just for the benefit of the old folks, how many square feet is he asking for? I know I saw it in square meters. What does it translate to in feet?
3,024 square feet. Because we have to also, that's the sum total of all the accessory buildings. So he also has a pump house, but this is the lion's share of that 3,024 square feet. It's broken down through the report what the other 2 small accessory buildings are. I believe there's 1 or 2 small.
Okay, thank you. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure whether we're voting on the recommendation one or the or, because I'm hoping that we're voting on the one for denial, because I think that that is just absolutely ridiculous that somebody would ask for a variance for that amount.
Thanks, Director Elliott. I can tell you that we are voting on the first recommendation that the board authorize the distribution of a notice of intent. And if that succeeds, then the board will authorize a notice of intent. If that motion fails, then I expect we will probably have someone move the or, that the board deny the variance application. So, but at this point, Director Watson has moved, and it has been seconded, that we authorize the distribution of the notice of intent. So that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you.
Director Quinn?
That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Schaefer?
I'd just like to ask, when you send out this letter, notice of intent, do you put on the 281 square meters, or do you put on the how many square feet? Because like you say, they don't understand, they'll understand 3,000 square feet better than the other one.
Well, I mean, we could do both, but the bylaw is in metric. We usually use the bylaw and the metric because the country is officially metric, but I can do both.
Is there any further discussion? Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This would be to staff. So if we denied this variance application, where are we in on the legal end of things to Ms. Campbell in doing this? I mean, this is totally way outside of the allotted or the approved type process in the bylaw. So what are our options?
Ms. Campbell?
In terms of denying it?
Well, yeah. So if we deny it, what can he come back at us with?
Mrs. Dilkova can probably speak to the bylaw specifically, but there's a reconsideration. Is there not a reconsideration process?
So the board can deny at this point, and the applicant can come back potentially with a smaller area. The applicant was quite adamant. You know, of course, staff talked to them. There's no surprise. We did tell them that we're very concerned and that we didn't think we could support it, but that it's a board decision. And usually applicants like to take their, go forward, but the applicant could come back with a smaller area, or they could opt to look at perhaps adding on to the dwelling. There's a dwelling on or a single family dwelling on the property that they could add on to somewhat. It's also where this dwelling is on the land. It will have, there are people above. There's other properties in the area. It's a subdivision. And I'm sorry, it was cut off the bottom of the page on page 5, but there is another aerial image attached. So you can see there's another layer of cabins or houses between Stevens Road and Loon Lake Road.
Oh, okay.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, we're on the first recommendation that the board authorize distribution of a notice of intent to consider development variance permit application number DBP 96 for 3038 Stevens Road. All in favor? Opposed, if any?
Oh, can we go back, please? Because based on our new procedure bylaw, we need to document the names of those who vote to the contrary. So we have Director Christian in favor. Who else do we have in favor on Zoom, please? Director Bass.
Director Watson.
Director Watson. And Director Rice.
And Director Rice.
We missing anybody?
Anybody else in favor who has not been named? Opposed, if any?
Thank you.
The motion's defeated. Is there any discussion on the motion to deny?
We can't hear them when they're in the big meeting room if they don't use their microphones.
I make a motion that we deny the variance.
Second.
And I seconded it.
Is there any discussion? No discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any?
Director
So
Christian
Director
opposed.
Bass,
Director Bass, Director Watson,
Director-
Director Rice. Thank you.
And Director Christian, were you opposed? Yep. The motion is carried. Item 10.2, temporary use permit. There is a
I'll move
recommendation.
the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. There is a report on curbside recycling in Electoral Area B. Director Quinn,
Move the recommendation.
is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Housing needs report. I think we're going to hear from Ms. McKay. There is a recommendation. Ms. Campbell, are we
Just checking
going to
if-
hear a
if,
presentation on this?
That's my understanding, if they're on Zoom. No?
I'm madly texting the consultant. I promised to text him before, but I was talking too much.
Oh,
So
my.
we jump ahead in the agenda, one item, and then I'll get him up.
Okay.
Maybe we'll move to the next item temporarily.
Okay, Kamloops Communication Site Leases and Emergency Response Agreements. There is a recommendation. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Emergency Services Communication 911 Agreement. There is a recommendation.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Just be sure to use your mics.
All in favor? Is anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. Okay, did you want to, should we return to item 11.1.2, Housing Needs Report?
I don't know, Ms. Sadokova.
I've got no answer from
Okay.
him. I would just keep going.
Let's
and
just
then
keep
go back
going
to it.
until
It's
we-
a short presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. Tobiano fire truck purchase.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to move number 1. Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any?
And number 2.
Second.
Is there any discussion on recommendation number 2? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried.
Okay, number 1 again, then?
Yeah, that had to be done that way.
Second.
If anybody requires an explanation of why it's done this way, Ms. Campbell's prepared to tell us.
They're two separate sets of bylaws that are required, so.
Thank you. So Director Elliott's moved recommendation number 1. Was it seconded?
Yeah, I seconded it.
Seconded. Thanks, Director Blackwell. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any?
And
Carried.
number 2.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any?
And
Number
I'm
2 is carried.
happy to move this number 1 under the next recommendation.
Second.
We're buying a fire truck, Mr. Chair.
Where am I?
I don't know.
I thought we had moved and
We got three
Oh,
sets
We've
of
got three sets of recommendations. I'm sorry, Director Elliott. Okay, so you number one of the third set of recommendations, is that right?
Yeah, we need the truck now. We've got the
That's,
bylaw.
that's moved and seconded.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? None opposed? Go ahead, Director Elliott.
And number two.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Singh.
A very unbureaucratic process, I must say.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Sorry about that, Director Elliott. I thought once we did it twice, that was good enough, but I guess it was required 3 times.
Like being married.
This Bridge Community Water System License of Occupation. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Item 11.1.7 has been struck from the agenda. So that takes us to 11.1.8, Building Permit Activity Report.
Move for information.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Committees, internal committees, the Audit Committee, Director Quinn.
No meeting, no report.
Thank you. Economic Development, Director Schaefer.
No meeting, no report.
Thank you. Emergency Management, Director Watson.
No meeting, no report.
Thank you. Regional Solid Waste, Director Schaefer.
No meeting, no report.
But there is a recommendation.
Yeah.
Second the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. TNRD Invasive Plant Management, Director.
Next meeting on March 10th. No meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thompson Regional Hospital District says to be appointed.
No meeting, no report. Then their next meeting will be in March.
Thanks, Director Christian. Utility System Committee, Director Shaker.
We have no chairs yet because the
Okay.
committees are new, so any of you can just speak up.
No meeting report.
Okay. Thompson Headwaters Committee, Director Quinn.
We had a meeting, minutes will be available next meeting.
Thank you. Wells Great Country Services, Director Schaefer.
No meeting, March 17th is the next meeting.
Thank you. Joint Services Committee, Director Schaefer and Black. Well, let's give Director Blackwell a chance.
We probably had a meeting, but I can't remember.
Okay. Fraser Basin Council, Director Rice.
We had a full meeting of the full board yesterday and this morning, and mostly to discuss a 5-year plan moving forward, strategic plan, and minutes will be in the next meeting.
Thank you. Municipal Finance Authority, Director Brown.
No meeting, no report.
Thank you. Municipal Insurance Accord Association, Director Duty.
No meeting, no news, no report.
Okay. Shuswap Watershed Council, Director Christian.
Next meeting is next Wednesday.
Thank you. Kamloops Airport Authority, Director Kershaw.
No meeting, but don't think there's any good information coming out of the airport at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Director
Elliott.
Oh, sorry, Director Elliott.
I was wondering, Director Kershaw, I still have an airplane going over my house in the mornings. So who is providing any kind of passenger service at this point?
I think Director Christian could tell you. That's the one from Vancouver, isn't it, Director Christian?
No, it's likely air freight. So FedEx is flying quite regular. In fact, their business has increased. But passenger service now is limited to Pacific Coastal and WestJet. And likely neither of them would fly over that flight path. So.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. FCM Director Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There'll be a FCM board meeting in March, I think just before we meet again here at the TNRD. So I'd be happy to talk more about, but I can't high level from there. I do want to report a little bit on, we had a BC caucus meeting of the FCM board. There's about 8 or 9 of us across the province who sit on the FCM board. And there's a couple of things that it'd be good to kind of give a sense to the board as to what's kind of, our board here as to what's kind of going on. So after the last federal election, FCM struck a group of all the Western presidents of associations and the big cities in Western Canada talk about the issues around regionalism. So, you know, as we know, in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, there's no government MPs. As far as I know, there's maybe one in that whole region of the country. And so the alienation from, you know, the sort of confederation is there. So FCM's done a lot of good work around trying to figure out not only resource-based economy questions, but also the questions around getting to net zero. And a lot of our colleagues in Alberta actually agree with the net zero sort of goal. Obviously, they got a big economic problem right now. So FCM was able to secure almost $2 billion actually to help rehabilitate abandoned oil wells. That's about 5,000 jobs in the province of Alberta and maybe in other West prairie provinces as well. But it's also something we have to kind of really keep our eye on in terms of what's going on in our national work. So there is that. I would also, we've had a lot of talks at City Council and Kamloops on our social issues. And obviously we had an unfortunate incident outside today. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was, a young fellow was having a bit of a breakdown there. And so, and in fact, I know him, he's a former tenant of mine, so that's why I went out, so everybody kind of knows. But the point is that on the FCM side, there is a lot of work around ranging from safe supply of drugs and decriminalization all the way to like how we can enforce better some of the criminal code elements of things to really help folks in a humane way who can't help themselves. So that's a little bit of an update for you. It's a very complicated sort of group and piece of work, but we're working through a bunch of items there on our behalf.
Thank you, Director Singh. That takes us to Community Energy Association Director Blackwell.
Next meeting is March 30th.
Thank you. Item 13, correspondence.
Sorry,
There-
Chair Gillis, I believe the consultant's available now for the presentation if you want to go back to that.
Okay, we can do that. That's 11.1.2 Housing Needs Report.
Perfect. I'll just start then. Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. Hi, directors. Apologies for being a little bit late jumping on. We had some technical difficulties. Appreciate your patience and excited to speak to you all this afternoon. My name is Sandy Mackey. I'm the Housing Research and Policy Lead at Macola Development Services. We're the consulting firm that was hired to conduct the Thompson-Nicola Regional District Housing Needs Assessment for all of the electoral areas, save electoral area O, and a number of the participating municipalities as well. Today, I'm going to be speaking only to the findings in the electoral areas that we covered. For each municipality, we're actually presenting directly to your councils. I believe I've presented to a few familiar faces already. So for those of you that have not had your presentation, they should be scheduled for the next couple of weeks. I am just going to share my screen. And I will try to keep this short and sweet because I know these days can be long. So if you do have any questions, I'll happily take them at the end. But for the time being, I think I'll just sort of run through some of our key findings and what you can expect to see in your housing needs report for the electoral areas. Great. So first and foremost, looking through the participating communities, obviously I mentioned all of the electoral areas, save electoral area O, but also the city of Merritt, Cache Creek, Clinton, Logan Lake, Clearwater, and Sun Peaks Resort Municipality are also participating in this study. Really important to take a regional approach to housing issues, as some issues that maybe are occurring in electoral area A are very much impacted by housing pressures in the district of Clearwater. You can't look at them separately, and taking a regional approach to these things allows us to be more nuanced with our data analysis and to give you a better idea of how certain housing markets are impacting others. So in your report, we're giving you information on what is happening. So local and regional information on demography, households, incomes, economy, and affordability, but also who it's happening to. We use a lot of engagement data that you'll see featured throughout this presentation. We've also conducted an affordability analysis, which should give you an idea of which income groups are struggling to meet their housing needs, and as well which households are struggling to meet their housing needs in your communities. What's not included in the report is the how, the implementation piece, where new housing should go, the form or density it should take. That's up to you as local government officials to decide how to act on the information in the report to support your community, often through an OCP or zoning bylaw update, partnership development, or community education, et cetera. And actually, we have included a local government policy guide as an appendix to the document, which is a great place to sort of start reviewing some of the tools that are available and at your disposal as a local government. So your report has three key components. The municipal reports are structured slightly differently, but for the electoral area reports, there is one regional summary report, which is sort of the introduction. And then there are nine electoral area sub-reports, and each of those sub-reports has a housing profile, which is a 4-page visual summary of the information that we collected on your electoral area, as well as the full housing needs report that meets all of the requirements set down by the funder and by the Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs. As well as there's a series of appendices, including that housing tools and policy guide I mentioned. There's an indicators and monitoring guide, a full engagement summary report, as well as some data tables that are really more useful for staff and that check off all of the boxes explicitly mentioned by provincial legislation. So onto our key findings. This is the fun part. One thing to take away from this is that in reality, the TNRD is actually still reasonably affordable, especially to households making moderate to above moderate incomes. Overall housing conditions across the board sort of improved from 2011 to 2016, which is when the last census was conducted and where a lot of our information has to come from for this report. However, it's not perfect. There's renters across your region still struggle. 24% of renters, so a quarter of your renters are in core housing need, which is our best sort of overall statistic that encapsulates housing need. You've got an aging population that will present a challenge and definitely a need for different types of housing along with certain supports. Rental availability is a challenge across the region, and we're seeing increased rates of rentership. And your housing markets are expanding, and pressures from the Lower Mainland, the Fraser Valley, and Kamloops may eventually start to reverberate throughout the electoral areas. So the report should be a call to action rather than encouraging complacency, even though most of your community members are in a relatively good position when it comes to housing affordability. So digging into some of those key points a little bit. Looking first at your population change. Generally, across the electoral areas, your population is stable. And I put a little asterisk there because we'll talk about a bit more about how population is growing in each one in the next slide. So as you can see, from 2011 to 2016, your population across all electoral areas decreased by about 3% and then held steady to about now. And we're projecting it to hold steady with about 0% plus or minus between now and 2026. However, demand for households went up across the electoral areas, whereas your population went down 3%. Household demand actually went up 4%, and we're projecting it to go up an additional 1% in the next 5 years. That's because household sizes are declining, which is typically a factor of an aging population, as well as changing household dynamics. As people age, their children move out, and less people tend to live in the same home. And as family structures change, more often now, 2 households are required to maintain one family as divorce rates, et cetera, sort of increase. So we're expecting demand to increase at a rate that exceeds your population increase across the board. But that population increase is not equal throughout all of your electoral areas. This graph shows in green the electoral areas that are increasing, and in red and orange the electoral areas that are decreasing in population. So you can really see that Kamloops and the surrounding electoral areas are increasing quite quickly. And there's also high rates of growth in electoral area A and electoral area B. Electoral area B has a relatively high rate of growth, but that is due to the relatively small amount of people that live in that community. So it is growing at a fast rate. It's only projected to grow between sort of 50 and 100 people between now and 2026. And recent trends that we've seen through anecdotal evidence are pointing to increased sales volumes in those electoral areas, especially JP and L around Kamloops, and higher prices due to things like amenity migration, people moving to places where they can access more living space, more land, et cetera, and other factors as well. The population change, more than people growing, is also changing in how people are aging. So this graph is showing how your population composition has changed between 2011 on the far left and 2026 on the far right. In 2011, about 17% of your population was over the age of 65 in the electoral areas. And in 2026, that's projected to be closer to 33%. So fully 1/3 of all of your residents over the age of 65. And that is not in itself a bad thing. That's happening across BC. Most communities are aging. Your electoral areas are aging at a rate that exceeds some of the municipalities and certainly exceeds some other regions in the province, but is nothing out of the ordinary, provided you look at some of the housing challenges and are prepared to address them. So many older residents that we spoke to worried about their ability to maintain larger properties, but were unable to downsize because of cost or availability. There's a couple of quotes here, one just saying how housing for seniors is getting expensive and there's not enough available, and another one saying a shortage of senior housing, i.e. single home units in a gated community. So they're describing a very specific type of senior housing. And for us, what would this sort of trend and these comments highlight is a need for affordable and accessible housing, particularly rental stock for older seniors. Home care and semi-supported or supported options need to be expanded as the population ages, and as well housing closer to amenity or services. So as population is growing in the electoral areas, how are you managing that growth to ensure that those new units are being built close or along servicing corridors, along transit corridors, and making sure that people who are maybe less able to operate a personal vehicle are still able to access the services and supports that they need. So looking at some potential solutions, land use decisions that prioritize multi-unit housing, particularly ground-oriented multi-unit housing, is something that came up in our conversations with senior residents, as well as housing that's along those active and public transportation corridors where they exist. And then a big piece that came up is seniors are looking for smaller units and units that are easier to maintain. They're not looking for fewer bedrooms. They still often want 2 or 3 bedrooms so they can have an office or have family visit. That's really important to folks. So thinking about what types of developments you're approving, where you're approving them is sort of the first way to start addressing some of this need. Another thing that we looked at in pretty big depth is renters. The number of renters is increasing across your region and increasing in nearly all age cohorts. And more than ever, renters are less likely to be able to meet their housing needs than owners. So this graph is showing in the blue the rate of rentership in 2006, and in yellow the rate of rentership in 2016, so the 10-year change. One thing that you'll notice is that rates of rentership are significantly higher in a few key age cohorts. These down here, ages 5 to about 20, and then over on this side, ages 30 to about 55. So what we're seeing is younger families especially are renting at much higher rates than they were even a decade ago. These people here are the parents of these young children down this end. So the largest jumps in the rates of rentership are in families with school-aged children. And that's a concern because renters tend to make significantly less income than owners do, and rental costs are increasing. Median renter household in electoral areas was about $50,000 per year. The median owner household was about $70,000 per year. So a fairly big jump, though less substantial than the jumps that we've seen in a lot of the municipalities in the study area. So that income gap is closer, but it's expanding. Owner households income grew by 3% over the study period. Renter household income decreased by 8% over the study period, and that's accounting for inflation. So those are pretty substantial increases. And that directly affects what many employers told us, which is that housing is key to their ability to attract and retain workers in key industries. There's pressure in the electoral areas from resource development and from tourism in a few specific spots. And they're really struggling to keep workers in those key industries because of housing issues. A couple of quotes here. Currently, we're building a pipeline in the area. This has created housing shortage and impacts low-income renters. And another one, I would really like to stay within the TNRD and be close to a healthcare facility, which is my place of employment, but there's not enough options in our communities. So again, highlighting a need for more dedicated, affordable, and appropriate rental options, housing for workers in key industries, and housing for families and individuals. And again, some of the ways forward, that growth management piece is again really important. Prioritizing purpose-built rentals, potentially expanding suites and infill permissions where servicing allows. I appreciate that in the electoral areas, servicing is a key concern. So working within your servicing restraints and managing growth where you want to have it. And then lastly, protecting existing stock. Where there is rental stock available, doing what you can to protect it, to prevent it from being, renovated and condoized, or protecting the affordability conditions represented by that building. And it's not just renters, owner-occupied housing is more expensive as well. A median house price across your region has steadily risen, and recent evidence is showing a higher rate, higher prices and frequency of sales. So your cost of ownership is increasing, and it's becoming harder to enter for middle to low income earners and single income households especially. And with COVID-19 moving people from those more urban communities like the Fraser Valley and like the Lower Mainland, we're seeing across BC that housing prices in some what were insulated areas are now rising at a rate that exceeds what people were expecting. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of 2020 or 2021 data available to us, but our general sense is from talking to folks in your planning department and folks in your communities, people are worried that soon they're going to be priced out of communities they maybe grew up in, or have children that aren't going to be able to afford to live in the community that they grew up in. So a couple of pieces here from our survey. 34% of all survey respondents indicated that their current housing was unaffordable. When we asked just renter respondents, they said it was 65% said it was unaffordable, so fairly high rates there. And we also asked folks what their key concerns are going to be for the next 5 years. And people suggested that the big ones were, the ability and cost of maintaining your home, the cost of housing in general, and distances to services and amenities. Those were huge factors. And you can really feel that those kind of comments are coming from those seniors and those people over the age of 65, especially with that ability to maintain my own home. So for us, that shows that the market is not doing a great job of meeting housing needs across your region. So that for us says that there needs to be more non-market, more supportive, and in some cases more emergency housing options. Now in the electoral areas, the demand for those emergency and supportive housing options right now are limited. They may go up as people age and need those sort of home care semi-support options. Most of the emergency housing demand is in your municipalities, but we did see increased rates of numbers of people living or staying with family and friends. That's what we call hidden homelessness. And we also saw many respondents reporting unsafe conditions, poor housing conditions, and really what came through was a general increase in worry and stress related to housing insecurity. And there's a quote here just saying, something that's really important is housing without fully functioning social services like mental health and hospitals will not attract people to a community. And then another person just indicating that they're concerned about the safety and condition of low-income housing where it exists. So again, that brings us to that dedicated, affordable, and appropriate rental options. Even looking at alternative tenure models like non-market housing that maybe is geared to your income. Often we call that secured affordable housing, and typically it's funded by senior levels of government and operated by a nonprofit, but local governments play a really important part in facilitating that by putting some of the land use mechanisms in effect that allow that development to happen easier and more cheaply built so that those rents can be lower. Also playing matchmaker, so matching up nonprofits with appropriate funding sources, things like that can be really important. And a big thing to do is educating your community to reduce the stigma around affordable uses. Not all non-market housing is sort of supported or emergency housing. A lot of it is just units that are held at a below market rate. And making sure people know that these units are not making sure they're educated about what these units are, what they represent, will help those developments go through with less sort of community pushback. One really interesting thing that a lot of people are looking at is a land acquisition and disposal strategy, obviously subject to servicing review, and prioritizing disposal of land to nonprofit housing uses. And then lastly, you can sort of explore incentives and encourage different ways of supporting nonprofit development. So the last thing I'll touch on here is a bit about disproportionately affected groups in your region. This graph really shows who is struggling the most to meet their housing needs. This is core housing need, which is, again, we talked about that one sort of catch-all metric that we use. Across your region, total core housing need is about 13% of your population. So that's fairly high, but it's not as high as we've seen in some other communities. For folks who identify as Indigenous on the census, that number jumps to about 23%. And for non-Indigenous residents, that number is lower, about 11%. And the numbers are quite low for families with children and families without children. That's typically because these represent dual income households or often couples. So even if it's only a single income household, the other partner stays at home, which enables the partner who's working to earn more in their career. So the partner at home is actually doing a lot of the unpaid labor that allows the other partner to earn more money. But lone parent households are the worst off. They have only one income, they have the added cost of childcare, and they have to have the added living expense of needing a house that can accommodate both them and their children. The other folks that are not doing as well are singles and roommates, which typically represent quite young community members or older community members. In these cases, while they may only be looking for housing for themselves, they're typically trying to do it on a single income, which is very difficult. And in both circumstances, if you have an Indigenous identity, you are much more likely to be in housing need. 50% of all Indigenous lone parents are in core housing need. So that gives you a really idea of where you need to target the resources when you can target those resources. And that's it. Our next steps for this project, I believe there's a resolution to accept that will be coming up, which is great. And as well, you'll be needing to post the housing needs reports on your website. I will work with Ms. Sadalkova to make sure you've got the appropriate documents to get posted. We're going to be hosting a staff training session as well as a community forum to share these results. The staff training session is to give staff an idea of how to conduct this study again in the next 5 years, because it is now part of your local government act that it has to be done every 5 years. And I believe both of those things will be coming up in the near future. We're hoping to be able to do it when we can gather safely together in person, as it's much more effective to have these kinds of conversations when we can not be limited by technology as we were today. But that's it. Lastly, I will say thank you very much to Regina, Alex, and Ashley at the Regional District, and to all of our key stakeholders and members of the community who participated in the survey or shared lived experience with us. It was really an incredible study, and your community was very giving with their time in a particularly trying period. So I really appreciate how much we received from members of your community. So thank you very much. Please, if I'll happily take any questions now, but if something comes up after the fact, I've left my email on the screen there, and you're welcome just to send me an email with any questions, or if you want some more information about what you read in the study, I'd happily do that as well.
Well, thank you for a fulsome report, and thank you for your presentation this afternoon. And I'm sure there may be some questions directed to the email address. There is a resolution with respect to the housing report.
I think Director Rothenberger had a question.
Director Rothenberger?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just always curious about population numbers. These reports, I think, typically rely on Census Canada numbers, which are not always consistent or up to speed with what we believe to be the case. And I think sometimes are significantly under the actual population. And I just wonder why that is. And secondly, if that is the case, what does that do to the validity of all the conclusions that are reached in the report with respect to percentages and trends?
And Director Rothenberger, was that question directed to Mr. McKay?
Well, I think firstly to Mr. McKay, if a staff can provide any enlightenment as to the point of the population, that might be helpful as well.
Okay, I understood Mr. McKay to say that he was unable to accept questions at this time, but we were welcome to address them through email. Did I mishear him?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Chair. I'm happy to address questions now or take them by email later if you're strapped for time. But I'm absolutely happy to address Director Rothenberger's question.
Well, please do. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, thanks, Director Rothenberger. It's actually a great point. The census is not a perfect mechanism for collecting information on any of these indicators, but nothing is. It's simply the best tool that we have available to us. So what we've done to supplement it where we can is we're also using BC statistics data, which keeps a more up-to-date projection of what current populations will be. And we're using our own population projections for 2026, but we're not going further than 2026. After that sort of 5-year period, they become less and less reliable. So the reality is that understanding that nothing is perfect, those trends that we're seeing typically would be still in effect even if the population was underrepresented. Now, in some communities, like say, I think Sun Peaks is a really good example as a community without the sort of like long-term trends that we've seen in maybe a city of Merritt. It can be more difficult to go after population, and population can change more quickly. So in those cases, we simply work with what we have, and we do our best to mitigate any errors by including pretty specific limitations in the report and speaking more to trends and confirming those trends through engagement and community experience whenever we can. So yes, it's not perfect, but the next report will hopefully come out after your 2021 census is complete. And that will give us at least another census data point to confirm those projections and all of those other trends that we're seeing. So it is a good point and a really valid question. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much, Mr. McKay, for your presentation. The District of Barrier did our own housing analysis last year through UBCM, and their findings were very similar to yours, particularly in the rental end of things. Case in point, I mean, in our district, housing has gone through the roof. There's nothing for sale. One person just purchased a home and they're thinking of renovating the basement, and they have 10 families on a list of that space. So I thank you very much for your report, and hoping that, as you recommended, that maybe other higher levels of government will look at the needs of all our regions out here, and looking at the interest rates at such historical lows that maybe we can have some of those assistances necessary to try to get these people into some affordable housing and not just, keep kicking the ball down the path. So thanks very much for your report.
Director Roden.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Thank you, Mr. Mackey, for the presentation. I wondered if you could perhaps just tell my fellow directors what you said to, I believe, the Village of Cache Creek when you talked about their housing needs assessment, and you did address the point about the census and the fact that these reports are all coming out just before the 2021 census. And your advice, I believe, was along the lines of, instead of leaving the next update for 5 years, do it in another 2 to 2.5 years after the full tranche of information from the 2021 census has been released, and then get into that 5-year update cycle after that.
Absolutely, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly what we're recommending. The legislation was put in effect in 2018. It mandated that your first housing needs report be completed by spring of 2022. And we're not going to get 2021 census data until probably 2023 at the earliest. So our suggestion is get this one done now, check your box in terms of your legislative requirement, put it on the books to do again in sort of 2 or maybe 3 years at the outside when that 2023 or all of the 2021 census data is released, and then get on your 5-year cycle, because that will just serve you better if you're conducting these immediately after the census data is released, because it is the most reliable tool that we have, even though it's not a perfect tool.
Ms. Campbell.
Director Rice, he has a question, I believe.
Director Rice.
Yes, and thanks for your presentation, Sandy. And just a quick scenario as a rural director, And it's hard for land acquisitions, but if you found a nice properly zoned piece of property and you were able to acquire that property, say in a community like Wallachine or Spencer's Bridge, for senior housing, which is really, we're in desperate shape for it, as you know, our community, some of our senior community is actually living in hospitals, and my mom included. So that being said, when you manage, let's say you could build a fourplex for senior housing. You're not talking big scale here because these are smaller communities. Now, how nonprofit management you mentioned and stuff like that. I'm just wondering, what is the business model to actually build something like that? And then the next step, who would manage something like that if you built something like that? And how would that look?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Director Rice. So one of the most common ways that it works is a nonprofit will, or a community will identify a need. That's sort of step one. You have an identified need, which I think this document goes a long way towards showing and fulfilling that first piece. The second piece is looking for a piece of land, usually a serviced piece of land close to amenities or services is the best way to go if you've got that. The third piece is finding a qualified nonprofit operator. And there are many qualified nonprofit operators, many operating within the TNRD. If you have more questions about what makes a nonprofit operator qualified or what makes a good nonprofit, I would suggest visiting the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. They are sort of the group that helps train folks up to get to that qualified stage and will do a lot of great work connecting existing providers with projects. So those are kind of the three pieces. The last piece that you need is funding. And often that comes through a low interest loan through BC Housing often, or through an institution, or you can get a sort of a combination loan and operating subsidy or sort of grant that comes through a BC Housing funding call. There was one that just closed in January. So the next one, we don't know when it'll happen, but hopefully soon. But then, you know, really the development, even though it's operated by a nonprofit, proceeds much like a for-profit development. Construction is not any cheaper for a nonprofit development than it is for a for-profit development. So your pro formas are very similar, except that there is an ongoing operating subsidy or a grant or equity contribution that helps offset the costs of those rents. Usually part of what happens with that operating subsidy is that there's an agreement 50 or 60 years to maintain those units at an affordable rate agreed upon at the beginning of the contract over the life of it. And that's what the nonprofit operator is taking on, that long-term contract to maintain those units at an affordable rate. So that's kind of how it works. There's a whole world of nonprofit development out there. And if it's something you're interested in, you've got a piece of land, then maybe what I can do is if you want to approach me afterwards, we can talk about maybe some potential solutions or looking to connect you with an operator who's working within your region. I might have some ideas because it is very complicated and every situation is completely different, even though the sort of basic elements can be kind of similar. So yeah, I'm happy to help, and it's a great sort of scenario to play out, Director Rice. Thank you.
I'm going to take you up on that offer.
Okay, I'm going to limit the questions to one further question from Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. McKay, for your presentation. In your studies, was there any evaluation made of recent changes to the Landlord-Tenant Act on the effect of affordable housing?
There wasn't, unfortunately. I didn't see anything that jumped out at us in terms of it affecting affordable housing, but we didn't do an explicit bit of research into the effect of that the change in legislation. So no, there wasn't.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again for your report, Mr. McKay. It is of keen interest to many of us.
Thank you.
There is a recommendation. Please use your mic.
Move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It is carried. That takes us to correspondence. There is no correspondence with action requested. There is a number of Letters with no action requested. Is there a motion to receive?
Move receipt.
Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Director Laird, then Director Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if the letters that have come in for the Highway 5A commercial truck traffic could be forwarded to whoever is coming to our public meeting. I don't know if we have them scheduled for March yet or not, but it'd be nice to be able to transfer that information to who's ever coming to talk to us so they can maybe address some of the issues would have been brought forward by the letters that have come in.
Is that a possibility, Ms. Campbell?
It is. The letters are public on our agenda, but we have them compiled so we can forward them on. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Director
Thank you, Mr.
Christian.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just referring to the letter from the MLAs at 13.2.1. I just want to clarify, Kamloops already has a cancer center. We perform cancer surgeries and we perform chemotherapy in Kamloops and have done for some time.
Right.
What the issue is radiation oncology, and I support what they are asking the Premier to provide detail on. But I would draw the board's attention to the section at the bottom about who pays for enhanced cancer care, because BC Cancer is a part and parcel of the Provincial Health Services Authority. It's not part of IHA, and it's outside the agreement that we have to fund 40% of the facilities of IHA. So the cancer center in Kelowna was funded provincially. And so I want to make sure that when cancer care comes to Kamloops, and I hope that they are effective in lobbying the Premier to come good on his election commitment to get it here, that it comes here without cost to the Thompson Regional Hospital District. That's just a point of clarification. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Director Christian. Now, where am I looking here? Sorry?
Okay, yes, I've got 2 points here. On 13.2.2, on behalf of the Weed Committee, I'd like to thank Clearwater for their letter of support. And on 13.2.3 from the Ministry of Land, Forest, Natural Resources, I'd like to point out that they didn't say no. So we're still in the running there. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Kershaw. Director Watson?
I have new business?
No?
Nope,
Not
that's
there
all
yet.
I have. You want, I
We
have
have
new business. Are we on new business?
Okay, we'll be there in a minute. We're at the moment,
Okay.
we have a motion to receive the correspondence, and it's been seconded. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? No one's opposed, and that takes us to new business. Director Watson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I would like to move that we should be beginning our meetings by acknowledging that we are in the land. The land that we gather on is in the traditional territory of the Kamloops Secwepemc First Nations. And this is a practice at nearly every meeting I go to and group that I belong to, except for the TNRD.
Second.
That's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Roden.
Thank you. While not disagreeing with Director Watson, I would suggest that before we take such a step, we consult with the local First Nations to find out appropriate wordage, because I have heard many different variations on the unceded territory, traditional unceded territory, traditional territory, and I think it's of paramount importance that we check with the local First Nations to find out what their view of the matter is.
I agree.
Thank you, Director Roden. Director Singh.
Director Roden's so smart.
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Director Roden.
Thank you. And Director Quinn?
If it's an actual motion, I would oppose it because I believe there's something like 22 separate First Nations in the regional district, and I have no idea how you would address that.
Thank you. I would imagine that issue would be resolved during the course of, if not resolved, certainly it would come up during the course of the consultation that's been suggested. So I heard you agree, Director Watson. So am I to understand then that your motion is to consult with First Nations with respect to introducing that at the
that as our meeting opener, yes, to acknowledge in whichever wording is appropriate.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Director Singh.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just have a much as a point of order, but I get a little worried when we start making motions before like we're off the fly. Like I think we should go to that notice of motion kind of an idea, because as we've sort of outlined a little bit, there's some rich discussion that has to happen before we get. I really view the intent of what Dr. Watson is going, but there's many ways that First Nations want to be recognized, and they're different in different parts of the region. So I would really appreciate if directors would give me at least the time to kind of be able to sort of think through things before bringing motions to the floor, because this sounds very simple, but it's actually not as simple as it sounds, as most things are.
Thanks, Director Quinn. Is there any further discussion? Director Rain?
Yeah, with that consultation with the First Nations, I think we should also have consultation from our own legal advisors, because we may get one recommendation and then may find out that legal advice for the TNRD would say slightly different wording. I'm not disputing the recognition issue, just really making sure that we have advice on both sides.
So is that, should we take that as a form of amendment, Director Rain, to include legal advice as well as consultation with First Nations?
Well, I wasn't so sure we needed a motion. I was thinking certainly we can proceed to get the background information.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Chair, I'll just speak to Director Singh's point about bringing a notice of motion. He makes a very good point, because anytime we want to introduce something that deviates from our usual operations or might have political implications, it should be introduced as a notice of motion. I think with this, because it's a first step to consult with the First Nations, we're not actually moving towards doing this. We're okay with that, but just to support what Director Singh said, just to be mindful that we do bring forward a notice of motion, because that gives directors the opportunity to consider it first, and that gives staff the opportunity to investigate a matter before we bring it to the board for further discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. There's no further, Director Rain?
In light of those comments, I would move to table at this time. Still proceed, but table.
I second that, Mr. Mayor.
Is there any discussion on Director Rain's move to table? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Is there any other new business from members? I'm not seeing any. There is a notice of motion from Director Rothenberger. Did you wish to?
Well, did you want me to read it? My intention with the motion is to just put it before the board for consideration between now and the next meeting. It's just some advance notice, basically.
Very good. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Director Rothenberger. Didn't want to get into it too much, Director Rothenberger, but on the first thing on the whereas where it says TNRD, school board, and the city council have become inadequate for their purposes. Do you have letters of support for that from those organizations to that effect, or is that just an opinion?
I guess that part would come under being pretty much self-evident if you've ever looked at at the other chambers.
Mr. Chairman, I just, I have no problem with him, what he's asking for, but it's pretty obvious that the council and the board are about a third of the size of the TNRD board. So having said that, and the fact that we're freezing to death today, if we made our boardroom bigger, we could accommodate all of them without really getting too much of expense, other than the fact that we're already looking at making our boardroom bigger, or at least changing some of the things within our building, the building that the city has an interest in. So I would like to make sure that we don't just go off willy-nilly and find a new place to park our meetings.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
So I just think
Just a minute, Director Singh.
Yeah, discussion right now isn't actually on the table. I don't believe it's
No,
a
it's
sort of
not.
notice, right? So
Yes.
I think we should stop discussing this right now and discuss
Yes.
it next time.
Thank you.
Ms. Campbell?
That's exactly what I was just going to say. We'll be discussing it at the next meeting. It's just to introduce it right now.
Thank you. Director Quinn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just finished this discussion in the previous item. A notice of motion is, hey, board, I'm going to bring this forward, period. Thank you, Director Rothenberger.
Okay, that takes us to question period.
We haven't received any questions to my knowledge.
No, thank you. Then I will entertain a motion that we move to a closed meeting.
So moved.
So,
We're just going to take a couple of minutes to take off the live stream and
Okay.
ensure that we only have directors remaining on the Zoom call.
okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.